I'm happy to give you an exclusive here, Andy. I will. This is the first forum I'm going to announce my intention to run for the candidacy of First Minister again.
Let's speak now to the Scottish Liberal Democrat leader, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Alex, hello.
Hello.
Great to have you on the podcast. So let's start then, as we have been doing, with a bit of a reflection from you on the departure of Humza Yousaf, which I think is interesting because lots of people are speaking quite affectionately about him, but that wasn't enough for you to want him to stay.
No, and I think it's right, though, on days like this, that we put politics aside initially and just reflect on, his public service and thank him for that. And also what was a very emotional resignation speech. But it was the right thing to do because he had fundamentally lost the trust of the rest of the Parliament. You cannot hope to govern as a minority administration and pass any kind of agenda under those circumstances. So for the good of the country, he had to go.
And what do you think will be the immediate difference that the country will feel? What will change?
Well, I think right now, fair-minded people are looking at Holyrood and the Scottish Government in particular in horror because it is clear that their priorities are not the people's priorities. We have increasing difficulty in anyone finding a GP or NHS dentistry, schools tumbling down the international rankings, and a government that's just ditched climate targets that we'd all signed up to. They want solid, competent government, stability at the top, and they've got none of that yet. Potentially more weeks or months of chaos if there's a contested election. Where actually, I think the best thing now, after considering we might be about to have the second SNP First Minister appointed without a popular mandate, is to go back to break this impasse, this political paralysis, and go back to the people who sent us to this Parliament and ask them for new instructions. And you can only do that with a general election.
Can I ask you, Alex, when we were on the podcast previously, you talked about the potential for coalition going forward. It's something that's inherent to the history of the Liberal Democrat Party. So what would you have done differently? Obviously, I think, there was recognition that Humza needed to jettison the Greens. Whether that had to happen last week or not is up for debate. But what would you have done differently in that scenario, given how coalitions work and you've seen it work and you've seen it fail? What would you have done differently to what?
Well, firstly, Geoff, thank you for that recognition. That is intrinsic to the Lib Dems, is finding compromise and consensus wherever we can. We couldn't do it this weekend because Humza had so fundamentally trashed any vestige of trust he still enjoyed across the benches. And to answer your question, what would I have done differently? I think I would have started by treating my partners with a bit more respect. I mean, this unceremonious dumping of the Greens 2 days after he'd said that arrangement was worth its weight in gold is not a way to do any kind of politics. Now, I've never supported the Butte House Agreement, that's no secret, but I recognise that two parties of different traditions finding common ground is actually a good thing for stability. We had 3 years of a parliamentary majority for the government, which meant that they could get their agenda through. But it seemed, and I think that people, listening to people who are civilians, who are not part of the political bubble, talk about this, they keep coming back to the playground, that this feels like playground politics, that Humza ditched his Green partners because he knew they were going to dump him. So it's all very sort of unedifying. And I think there was a way to extricate yourself, or the SNP could have extricated themselves from that arrangement with more grace and process, and probably involving their membership.
Yeah, I think it was Jack McConnell that said it, and I actually think he was right. I just wonder when the Greens, said, look, we're going to have to go to our membership and have an EGM on the future of this. I just wonder if there was a window of opportunity for Humza to do similar and say, right, I'm going to have to speak to the party, and then come back and say, look, this is difficult for both of us. It doesn't look like I'm going to carry the party, and have that mutual party. Perhaps they would have been able to have a confidence and supply kind of arrangement going forward. I don't know, but I think it's interesting. And listen, it's all past now, but perhaps that's one of Humza's regrets in all of this.
Yeah, I think that's right, and actually I think it speaks to a received wisdom that people have about the SNP, is that they're a command and control party, that they don't think to involve their members, that they don't think to check or sense check or take the temperature of their rank and file, and I think that is something that's going to foment further difficulty for the party going forward.
Alex, let me ask you. I asked this question earlier on, and I'm going to ask you the same. I'm not going to tell you what he said because I'm really interested to know what your interpretation of it is. But as somebody who lives here and has family here and wants the place to do better, in general terms, do you think that a government run by either John Swinney or Kate Forbes or a combination of the two is likely to be a better run government than the one that we've had over the last couple of years? I mean, as a citizen, do you think, okay, there's a decent chance this will actually make things a little bit better for us?
I'll give you a surprising answer. I hope so, because I love my country and I have to live here. I want government to succeed, but to succeed, it needs to re-centre itself on the priorities of the people of Scotland, by which I've been through them already, but access to local healthcare, education, a more fertile environment for business and hospitality in particular. So as with a lot of, people don't see this in politics. Actually, there's not a huge amount of difference in terms of the value base of your mainstream politicians these days. We've all got shared ambitions to do right by our communities and to do right by the people who sent us to this place. We've got varying approaches as to how to get there, but I think we can all see that in each other's outlook and our makeup. So I would want them to succeed in the delivery of effective public service, because we haven't had that for so long. It feels like there's been warning lights blinking across the dashboard of public policy, crying out for ministerial attention and going wanting.
One more then, right? I just want to ask you, come on, because it's just a bit of fun and it's okay. Nobody's going to pay any attention. So, it looks like, I think we can presume that the next First Minister, unless there's any surprises, is going to be either John Swinney or Kate Forbes, right? So, and I know that it's all hypotheticals, and I know you won't engage in hypotheticals, but at some point there's going to be a vote in that Parliament for who's going to be the First Minister. And between those two, can you see any differences depending on which one it is as to how you guys might vote in that, whether it's positive or negative or an abstention? Do you think you'll vote the same way, whichever one it is, or can you see a difference in what you might do?
I'm happy to give you an exclusive here, Andy. I will. This is the first forum I'm going to announce my intention to run for the candidacy of First Minister again. So our guys will certainly have a weather eye on how we're voting. But no, I understand your premise. Look, I'm not going to pick a side in an internal civil war within the SNP. That is for them to resolve. And ultimately, I was sent here with instructions from my community to keep this nationalist government focused on the day job and not on the things that I think have distracted it for so long, particularly around the Constitution. That's my priority. We're not going to vote in the affirmative for either of those candidates, should my candidacy fail, as want to do. But at the same time, we still believe in grown-up politics. Liberals have always believed in reaching out across political traditions to do right by the people of this country. So while I wrote to Humza on the weekend saying I was, after a lot of thought I have to say, going to respectfully decline his offer of talks for sustaining his minority administration, it is only because I had felt he had shattered any possible common ground of trust or rooted consensus that we could have then built any kind of programme together out of the window. Now, I'm never going to join a coalition with the SNP, but they can win our votes on things that we agree with, particularly around things like mental health, long COVID, areas of social policy which have been allowed to drift and have gone underfunded for far too long.
Can I've got to pull you up, I'm afraid, Alex. I'm going to charge you with hypocrisy here. So you said you criticised Humza for the way he treated the Greens, but you've just given us this exclusive, which I'm very grateful for, that you're going to be standing as a candidate, and yet you've criticised the Greens for being two clowns in the wider circus. So how's that reaching out across the divide if you're seeking a consensus to be First Minister, Alex?
That was a turn of phrase, Geoff, that I think I apologise for at that very moment in the chamber. Listen, there's a cut and thrust and a theatre that goes with this, and sometimes we don't always cover ourselves in glory. But look at, I think over the period, particularly during the pandemic, particularly working to save things like HIV Scotland, I have worked with the SNP and the Greens in power before to further the aims of the people of Scotland and to try and bridge those inequalities in our society. I will do so again. But listen, don't conflate that with the theatre of Parliament on any given day.
It's just a bit of fun. I couldn't let it slide.
You're in a kind crowd, yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.